Hey guys, I hope you are well. Welcome to Before the Scroll. Here we peel back the polished myths of history and reveal the quiet, unspoken truths. The stories are told slowly, richly, with a touch of grit, enough to carry you gently through the past and maybe into sleep. We hope you enjoy the journey, and now let's turn back the scroll. Imagine spending your teenage years not at school or playing games, but scrubbing rust off armor until your fingers bled. This was the daily reality for a knight's apprentice. Forget the glamorous tales of chivalry. Today we're uncovering the brutal, unspoken truth of medieval training. From dawn till dusk, these boys endured back-breaking labor, harsh discipline, and the constant stench of unwashed wool. Why did anyone sign up for this? And how did they survive? Tonight, we pull back the curtain on the grim apprenticeship that built and broke medieval warriors. Picture a peasant family in 12th century England. Your fields yield barely enough to survive another winter, and the local lord demands more taxes. You have too many mouths to feed, and your 7-year-old son is eating more than he can contribute. The solution? Hand him over to a knight. This wasn't about chasing glory. It was desperation disguised as opportunity. The contracts were brutal. A boy between 7 and 10 years old would be bound for 7 to 14 years of service. His family might receive a sack of grain or temporary protection from bandits in exchange. Some paid a knight's fee, a full year's wages, just for the privilege of surrendering their child. The documents called it apprenticeship. In reality, it was indentured servitude, with a side of sword-shaped propaganda. The boys arrived expecting to learn combat. Instead, they got a crash course in exploitation. Accounts from the period describe kids scrubbing rusted armor until their hands cracked, hauling water for hours, or cleaning stables while the knight's actual squires practiced swordsmanship. Runaways were common and costly. Local sheriffs hunted escapees like fugitives, branding their cheeks if caught. One 13th century ledger lists bounties for returned apprentices alongside stolen livestock. About 1 in 3 boys never made it to knighthood. Some died from illness or accidents, others fled and joined bandit gangs, the only alternative to starvation. The lucky ones? They became professional servants instead of warriors. The disillusionment came fast. Within weeks, most apprentices realized their role. Unpaid labor in a system that viewed them as replaceable. They polished the armor they'd never wear, sharpened swords they'd never wield, and slept in stalls while dreaming of the battles they'd been promised. By the time they turned 14, their hands were calloused from chores, not combat. Their backs ached from hauling firewood, not armor, and their survival depended on pleasing a master who saw them as property. Tomorrow's knights started here, not in a heroic training montage, but in a cycle of menial labor passed off as education. The real lessons weren't about chivalry, they were about endurance. Next up, what exactly filled those 18-hour workdays? It wasn't sword fights. It was shoveling, scrubbing, and surviving the smell of unwashed wool gambesons. The church bell rings at 4 a.m. It's not a gentle chime. It's a fist pounding on the door of your straw pallet. You're 9 years old, and your first task is mucking out the stables before the knight's warhorse wakes up. Chivalric manuals claimed apprentices spent their mornings in sword drills. The reality? You'll spend the next 3 hours shoveling manure into a cart, your back already aching before sunrise. Breakfast is a heel of stale bread eaten while standing near the latrine trench, the only place you're allowed to stop moving. Then it's time to haul water. 15 trips from the well to the kitchens, each bucket sloshing icy liquid onto your bare feet. Your hands blister under the rope burns, but stopping means a thrashing. By mid-morning, you're scrubbing armor with sand and vinegar. The rust stains your fingertips orange, the acid eating at your nails. The knight's actual squires train with wooden swords in the courtyard. You're deemed unworthy to join them. Instead, you spend weapons practice, sharpening blades on a whetstone until your wrists cramp. Lunch is a bowl of thin broth shared with the hunting dogs. You eat fast. The stable master needs his levers oiled before afternoon patrol. The gambesons need washing next. 20 pounds of sweat-soaked wool armor, reeking of lanolin and old blood. There's no break for dinner, just cold porridge gulped between carrying firewood to the forge. Sunset brings evening drills, holding a shield stance until your legs buckle. By nightfall, your hands are raw, your knees scraped from scrubbing floors. The older apprentices get the straw mattresses. You sleep on a damp stone ledge near the kennels, curled tight against the cold. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Records show most apprentices developed chronic injuries by 15, slipped discs from hauling water, twisted shoulders from endless polishing. Some coughed blood from the damp, others limped from untreated fractures. Less than a third would ever hold a real sword in battle. Glamour of knighthood didn't shine in these barracks. It was buried under layers of grime, soaked in the smell of wet wool, and measured in blisters. Next, we'll talk about where and with whom these kids actually slept. Hint: rats were the least of their problems. The Lord's family sleeps in feather beds with linen sheets. You sleep on a mildewed straw pallet shared with 3 other boys. Wedged between the kennel and the latrine chute, the air reeks of wet dog and rotting food scraps. Your pillow is a rolled-up gambeson that hasn't been washed in a year. Previous records show apprentices were usually housed in the undercroft, that damp space below the kitchens where the cold seeps up through the stone. In winter, you'd huddle together like livestock, stealing warmth from the hunting dogs curled between you. Frost formed on the walls by November. By December, the coughing started. That deep, wet hack they called stone lung, from breathing mold spores in the perpetual damp. Bedbugs were inevitable. You'd wake with itching red bites along your arms and neck, scratching until you bled. Lice nested in the straw, crawling into your ears at night. Some boys shaved their heads to avoid the constant itching, only to find the fleas migrated south. Sleep came in short bursts. The castle never truly quieted. Night watchmen clanking armor, rats scurrying across the floor, the sporadic yelp of a dog kicked by someone shifting in the dark. Wet the bed, and you'd spend the next night locked in the stocks as punishment, your shame on display for the morning kitchen staff. Plague years were worst. When the Black Death hit in 1348, entire apprentice groups were wiped out within weeks. Their quarters were the lowest, dankest part of the castle, perfect breeding grounds for disease. The survivors described finding their bunkmates stiff and blue at dawn, straw stuck to the dried vomit on their faces. Why these conditions? Simple economics. Apprentices were investments, not people. Keeping them alive cost coin. Fresh straw meant sending servants to harvest and haul it. A fire in the undercroft required wood and a guard to watch it. Easier to let the boys shiver together like puppies in a whelping box. The hierarchy was clear. Even the hunting hounds got vetting and fresh bedding. You got a patch of floor and whatever scraps of warmth you could steal. Tomorrow's lesson: how knights in training earned their bruises, and why wooden swords left deeper scars than steel. The knights' training manuals describe a structured curriculum, mastering the shield at 7, the dagger at 10, the sword at 14. Reality was less poetic. Your first lesson involves standing in a muddy courtyard, holding a 15-pound wooden shield for 3 hours straight. Your arms shake, your knees buckle. When you drop it, the instructor whacks your thighs with a switch. This isn't training, it's endurance testing disguised as education. Actual swordplay was rare. Most apprentices spent years being used as living training dummies. Older squires practiced their swings on your body with blunt wooden wasters. A 13th century chronicle describes the ritual. New boys lined up to receive 20 blows across the back, to test their mettle. Bruises were considered proof of progress. Broken fingers? A valuable lesson in grip strength. Injuries weren't treated, they were endured. A fractured arm got wrapped in linen soaked in vinegar. Dislocated shoulders were popped back into place by 2 squires yanking in opposite directions. The castle's physician only intervened if the knight feared losing his investment. Many apprentices developed permanent limps from improperly set leg bones. One account describes a boy who trained for months with an untreated rib fracture, his breath coming in wet, painful hitches. The psychological toll was worse. Failed drills meant public humiliation, being forced to wear a donkey's bridle during meals or carry buckets of water while knights mocked you. A French knight's memoir casually mentions making clumsy apprentices lick grease off armor to improve their discipline. Wooden swords caused more damage than steel ever would. The bruises layered over each other, fresh yellow ones atop fading purple, crusted scabs splitting open during shield drills. By 15, most apprentices moved with the stiff caution of old men, their bodies a map of half-healed injuries. Only 1 in 5 would ever advance to proper weapons training. The rest became permanent targets, their backs and arms toughened into leather from years of beatings. The few who progressed often turned cruel themselves, perpetuating the cycle on new recruits. Why tolerate this? Because escape meant starvation or outlaw status. Better aching bones than a bounty on your head. Next time you see a knight's polished sword, remember, its gleam was paid for in the bruises of boys who never got to wield it. Coming up, how the castle's dogs ate better than you did, and why laughing at the wrong joke could land you in the stocks. The castle's social ladder was brutal, and you clung to the very bottom rung. Even the hunting hounds ranked above apprentices. At least they got fresh meat scraps. Servants and stable hands sneered as they passed. You were the human equivalent of the muck they scraped off their boots. Meal times laid the hierarchy bare. The lord dined on roasted pheasant in the great hall. The household servants ate vegetable pottage in the kitchens. You got whatever congealed scraps remained, scraped into a wooden trencher hours later. Bread so stale you had to soak it in water to chew it. Meat crawling with maggots was common. One account describes apprentices picking weevils out of their porridge like extra protein. Your one moment of privilege, poison tasting, before the night ate, you'd take a bite of each dish and wait. If you didn't convulse or foam at the mouth within the hour, the food was deemed safe. Some lords preferred using dogs for this, but hungry boys were cheaper to replace. Feasts were torture. You'd stand motionless behind your master's chair for hours, arms trembling under the weight of a wine pitcher. A single misstep, a sloshed drop of ale, a flinch when a drunk guest waved a knife, earned a blow to the ear. Manuscripts show pages being forced to kneel on dried peas for giggling during speeches. The rare victories were small and vicious. A servant's account from 1382 describes an apprentice secretly feeding the knight's favourite falcon rotten meat. Another tells of boys urinating into the armour polish when no one was looking. Most revenge schemes ended badly. One runaway's journal mentions getting whipped for putting nettles in a squire's bed linens. Making a mistake in front of the master meant immediate punishment. Spill wine during a toast? You'd wear the sticky remnants in your hair for a week as a lesson. Drop a platter? Expect to carry firewood with your arms outstretched until sunset. The worst offences, like speaking out of turn, could get you chained in the kennels overnight. One German chronicle describes a 12-year-old forced to wear a bell on his cap for 2 months after laughing during prayers. The message was clear. You weren't a future knight. You were a barely tolerated nuisance who happened to be useful. Next, we'll talk about the infections crawling under your skin and why tetanus was just part of the curriculum. The armour manuals mention cleanliness and maintenance. The reality? Your hands are covered in rust cuts from polishing mail all morning. One of those cuts turns angry red by noon. By nightfall, it's oozing yellow pus. Welcome to your first tetanus scare. Medical care consists of the blacksmith pressing a hot iron against the wound while 2 squires hold you down. The smell of your own burning flesh mixes with the stench of lanolin from the armour you just cleaned. Battlefield first aid was worse. When knights returned wounded, you'd clean their gashes with urine. The ammonia supposedly prevented infection. No one told you urine only works if it's fresh. Using yesterday's chamber pot contents just gave them extra toxins. Deep wounds got packed with moldy bread, poultices, or spiderwebs. Not for any medical reason. It was just something the old grooms swore by. Plagues swept through apprentice quarters like harvest seasons. Typhus arrived via the lice in your straw mattress. First came the fever, then the rash, then the delirium. Whole groups of boys would vanish within weeks. Replacement apprentices showed up before the dead were cold, usually younger, hungrier, more desperate. Their families had already paid the night's fee. Chainmail left its own marks. Handling rusty links drove metal splinters deep under your nails. Untreated, these festered into greenish abscesses. Some boys lost fingers to the infections. Others developed permanent ridges in their fingertips from years of pushing wire rings through open cuts. Survival rates were grim. Maybe 1 in 3 apprentices lived to see knighthood. The rest died from disease, infected wounds, or training accidents. Broken necks from falling horses, crushed ribs during mock battles, the occasional arrow to the face during archery practice. Lords wrote these off as the cost of doing business. A dead apprentice meant another fee from a new family. The few who made it carried the scars. Chronic joint pain from untreated fractures, lungs damaged by forge smoke, limbs that never fully straightened after being set by drunken bone setters. By the time they earned their spurs, their bodies were already half ruined. Next up, the desperate few who tried to run. You wake before dawn, clutching a stolen knife and 3 moldy biscuits. Your feet are bare to avoid noise. The kennel dogs know you. They won't bark. This is your 3rd escape attempt. The first time, they caught you at the mill pond. The second time, you made it 8 miles before hunger drove you to steal eggs from a farm. The farmer's sons tied you to a post and whistled for the bailiff. Runaways were hunted like deer. Sheriffs posted notices offering 2 shillings for returned apprentices, half a year's wages for peasants. Bounty hunters checked taverns and mills, knowing starving boys would beg near food. When caught, you'd wear an iron collar until branded. The mark was usually on the cheek, a crude F for fugitivus. One 14th century ledger lists 17 branded runaways in a single season, all under age 15. Some apprentices faked deaths. A French chronicle describes a boy who smeared himself with pig's blood and lay in the midden heap until nightfall. He got 3 days' head start before the stablemaster noticed the corpse was missing. Other escapees joined bandit gangs robbing travelers. These groups lurked near crossroads, surviving on stolen sheep and the occasional murdered merchant. Their ranks were full of failed squires, boys who chose highway robbery over another beating. The luckiest found shelter in monasteries. A few sympathetic monks would take in runaways, putting them to work copying manuscripts instead of scrubbing armor. But monasteries demanded literacy, something most apprentices never learned. About 1 in 10 escapes succeeded. These vanish into town cellars, shipping crews, or remote farmsteads. Their families often pretended not to know them if scouts came asking. Better a son alive in hiding than branded and returned to his master's wrath. Failed escapees faced grim choices. Some were demoted to permanent stable hands. Others got sold to neighboring lords at half price, a warning to their replacement. The weakest were cast out entirely, left to beg at church gates with their branding marks visible. A knight's journal from 1376 mentions an apprentice who dove into a frozen river rather than be dragged back. They fished him out blue and stiff, his hands still clenched around the reeds. Those who stayed learned a harsh lesson. It wasn't just the training that broke you. It was knowing freedom existed just past the castle walls, and that crossing that line could cost your face or your life. Next time, the handful who survived to knighthood. What happened when the beaten became the beaters? The chapel bells ring as you kneel in polished armor you finally get to wear instead of clean. The sword touches your shoulders, first left, then right. Congratulations, you survived. The banquet afterwards smells of roast boar and spiced wine. No one mentions how your right hand shakes, holding the goblet. The old break in your wrist never healing right. Former apprentices made the cruelest knights. Records show they beat their own squires harder, worked them longer. You recognize it now. The same vicious glee your instructors had when making you hold a saddlebag at arm's length for hours. Some accounts describe knights ordering midnight drills just to watch boys stumble in the dark. The cycle continues. Your body is a ledger of injuries. Knees ache before rain comes. A deep breath still catches where that squire broke your ribs during sword practice. Chronic pain means you'll never joust properly. Tournaments become about appearances, not skill. The armor helps hide the wobble in your stance. Alcoholism runs rampant among new knights. Ale numbs the throbbing knuckles. The stabbing hip pain from that fall off the quintain. Tavern keepers know to water down your wine after the third cup, when the memories of lice-filled straw and branding irons surface. Some drink themselves into early graves. Others take up gambling to forget, losing their estates by 30. Training accidents still happen suspiciously often. A squire trips onto your lance during practice. A loose cinch sends a rival into the tilting barrier. You're not the first to settle old scores this way. Inquests get dismissed. Boys will be boys after all. The system was designed to break before it built. You endured because you started at 7, young enough for the abuse to reshape your bones and morals alike. Those who began after 10 usually quit or died. The ones who made it never shook the lessons. Pain is power, cruelty is control, and every shining suit of armor hides a back that still twinges when it rains. Squires line up for their first beatings. You weigh the wooden waster in your hand, remembering how the grain felt against your own ribs. The chapel bells toll again. Somewhere, a peasant family hands over their youngest son, praying this horror will save him from starvation. The wheel turns. Next time you see a knight's gleaming armor, remember the rust stains under the polish. That pristine suit of armor in the museum took a child 7 years to polish. The dents in the breastplate? Those aren't battle scars. They're faded imprints from a squire's frustrated fist. History remembers the gleaming mail and heroic tales, not the hands that scrubbed blood from chain links, or the boys who coughed themselves to death in drafty barracks. Every epic joust, every noble charge built on the backs of kids traded like livestock. So sleep tight in your clean bed, under your uninfested blankets. Your worst Monday beats their best day. The past wasn't golden. It was rust, lice, and the sour taste of stolen childhoods.